Okay, left on my docs space. But okay, we're trying. Jordan, be talking about web components, specifically with Polymer today. So, what are web components? They're a set of standards for creating and encapsulating, so you can make reusable HTML elements. And then there's some of the other standards are things like shadow DOM and HTML imports. So, what does Polymer do? Polymer provides polyfills for any of the features for web components that aren't supported natively in the browser. It does the double checking to see if the native version works, and it'll use that because it's generally faster. And then it has a library of web components for you to use. So they already have some custom web components that you can use in your applications. And then it does add some additional syntactic sugar for wiring things together in your web components. So to get up and running, you'll need to install Node.js. You install Bower. You can set up your Bower JSON file. It's kind of, if you never plan on hosting it up on Bower, then you can skip this step. And then you'll need to install your Polymer dependencies. You don't need to use the -- save flag if you don't have your Bower JSON file, because the only thing that does is mark it a dependency in your Bower file. So some of the packages that we'll be using are Polymer library, which has their library in polyfills. And then core elements and paper elements are part of the web components that they build for you. Those are the comprehensive packages, so there's a ton of elements in there, in each one. They do have just Bower packages for individual ones, so if you only want to use the paper tabs out of paper elements, then you can just bring that one package in. But to get started, just to play with it, you're probably better off just pulling in both of the big comprehensive packages. And then let's just get going with seeing what this thing can do. Since I already have it set up, all you have to do is npm start. It starts up a web server. I don't know why it crashed. Apparently, yeah, my Wi-Fi setup is totally hosed. There we go. When I have internet, this works better. So, for those of you familiar with the Utah transit system, these are the tracks trains. There's the red line, the blue line, the green, the S line streetcar, and all the lines. This is using the web component made by Google, the Google Map web component underneath the covers. If you switch lines, then you'll see that the icons switched. You see where all the trains are. There's the green line, and then the S car. And then if you wanted to, you could just throw all the lines up there. This does auto-refresh every 15 seconds and redraws where the trains are. Connects to the UTA API to see where all the current trains are. That's why the icons flicker, is when it's going and pulling data and updating. Waiting to see if they'll actually move. Okay, they didn't move very far, but some of this blue line in particular did actually move. Because there's this Gallivan station, which is actually right behind us. Yeah, so they do move. And since this is using their API, or their web component, then it obviously supports everything, and there's even Street View and whatever you want it to do. No, it's not that long. So let's get back out of here. And then we can go look at how some of this is put together. So since the UTA API is strange and doesn't allow CORS requests, you have to have your own web server to hit the API and then stream the data down to your own web app. So I made an Express.js server to serve out that. So I have a public folder which has all of my Polymer web components and everything else. So here's all the, like I said, there's a ton of core elements and a lot of paper elements in those libraries, so there's way more than what we're using. But I'm using the HTTP module, path, request, XML to JS, and then Q's promises library. This basically just wires up the public folder for serving static files, so any request that I do will be served out of the public folder, and then I just routes to grab. If -1 basically is the all routes, and I've hard-coded it because server's kind of not exactly what you would expect a web component to do. You should be able to just drop it on almost any website, configure it, and let it go like the Google Maps one, because the Google Maps servers are public and I can hit those through CORS. But since the UTA one isn't, this kind of abuses what you would traditionally do with a web component. You shouldn't need a server component to it unless that's a public API. And then get train, I get a deferred promise. I hit the route with the route number. It comes back with some XML. I translate the XML and build up a JSON object and send the JSON back. And we can actually see this. I just hit /route with a number. So here's the JSON that I'm returning after mucking with their data. But since that's not web component related, that's just how the data is getting there. Let's move on. So you have HTML imports. So you get this rel import, and then you can actually point it at an HTML file. And what it's going to do is any links or scripts or anything that get included in that HTML file are going to just be brought in as dependencies. So I'm linking in a CSS and then these two web components. This train route is my own custom web component. So here you'll see that we have a train route tag, not a typical HTML tag. And then I have a div in there, and then I'm using the paper tabs, which is one of Polymer's web components. So I'm using a web component inside of a web component. And then paper tabs are just they give you the tabs up here. So the little flash animation and sliding and all that is just part of paper tabs. If you didn't like the flash, you can just add the no ink attribute, and then that ink animation disappears. This unresolved is something Polymer is doing for you, because I'm sure you've seen where you'll get the white screen before all the JS loads. So the unresolved prevents that from happening for browsers that don't have native support until everything else gets loaded in. But you have to link at least the platform.js before Polymer is going to work for you. And then everything else is just in this platform.js. That's where all the polyfills come from. And then here I'm just obviously defining my tabs, what the route should be. The value attribute just says what the selected value, what attribute it should point at. So selected 703, that's why the red line is the default tab. And then I have a little bit of JavaScript on here to just update my route tag. Has a property on it called route number, and then I'm just setting that to the selected tab. So that's just wiring it up, and then we'll see how the paper tabs actually get placed inside of the train route right now. So here I'm pulling in the Google Map web component, the core header panel, and then the core toolbar, which core toolbar is just another one of the web components from Polymer. That's one of their layout elements. So attributes, if you expose an attribute here, which are just space delimited, so you can have as many as you want, those are Polymer's published properties. So that's how the route number is accessible from out here. Polymer is actually wiring that up to where it can be exposed to external. Polymer's made their own element tag called Polymer element. The actual W3 spec for web components, it would just be element. You can put a template tag in it, you can put a style and a script tag in it. You can only have one template tag as a direct child of it, otherwise it will break. So I'm doing my styling in here. If you do, I don't actually have it in this one, so I'll talk about it later. With Polymer, your names do have to have a hyphen in them. That's just one of the requirements that they have. And then I have another web component that I made called train service. It just has an ID of service that I can use their finder service. And then here's some of the syntactic sugar for bindings in Polymer. So I'm actually binding the route number property of the train service to this property that I'm exposing externally. So when you update it from the index page, it's actually changing the property here and then binding it and updating the route number property on the train service. The train service is what actually goes and hits the API and pulls the data. And then the train service has a route updated event, and by convention, if you just put on in front of it and wire it up to a function, then anytime this event is fired, it'll call this function. This function's declared down here. So clear map, anything with an ID, you can do it should just be this $$ dot and then the ID name, and Polymer is actually keeping that collection for you inside of just this one web component. So you can quickly grab things and you don't have to query the DOM or anything. And then to register your component with Polymer, you have to at least call the Polymer function with the name, and then you could just pass an empty object if you didn't want to do anything. The ready function is kind of like the DOM ready. So when your Polymer element is all configured, all the events are wired and everything, it'll call the ready function if you wanted to do anything in here. I have this commented out block where you could query for Google Map and then do map.add event listener, Google Map ready, and then alert just saying like Google Maps is ready. But instead of doing that the long-handed way, I just did another on hyphen Google Map ready, maps loaded, and then when the map loads, I start up my timer and call get data on my service and clear the map, which clears all the markers. And then I just do that every 15 seconds. So I just wanted to show that you could still do a pure JavaScript way, but since the internals of a web component are put in the shadow DOM, you actually have to get at the shadow root object and then run your query selector to find it internally. I can actually show you what these things actually render out as. So Chrome actually has support for these things, so you'll see that there's a core header or a train service or Google Maps, and then you'll see this weird shadow root thing because it's only showing you the core header panel. But if you actually wanted to see the HTML that made up the core header panel, then you can expand the shadow root and see here's the style for everything, and this :host is just your way of getting a CSS style applied to the core header panel directly. And then mode scroll and other things. Yes?
So that's just supported in the form by default, you don't need to download anything.
Yeah, well, to get the Polymer element tag to work right as an actual web component, you still need to call that Polymer function. But in Chrome, no. That's just a supported feature of Chrome. Chrome actually has support for the HTML imports and the shadow DOM and everything else. Oh, I wish it wouldn't have highlighted everything. Either which way. So you can actually see what it's doing underneath the covers and all the IDs they have and you can see that since this is a Polymer tag, it's using the Polymer binding. And since Chrome doesn't know anything about that, it just puts exactly what's there. So even my train service has a shadow root, but it doesn't do much other than another core Ajax wrapper. And then it's basically a hidden tag, so the host display none just hides the element. So you can debug those and everything else. If you go to sources, you can click index and then like that'll work, or if you go to train route, you can put breakpoints and they'll get hit. So you can still debug your web components like this. It's kind of weird having a script tag in here. You can obviously reference them like you would with a normal link tag and bring an external JavaScript, and that works as well. It's just easier to demo it if all the code is kind of right in front of you. And that's actually how the spec declares it. So it's slightly interesting. And then I guess the last thing to do is we can talk about this again. Here's attributes, train data, and route number. And then, like I said, the column host is just a way to get at the train service tag and apply CSS directly. I have Ajax, and then here's the call to my server, binding again to the route number, and then there's a core response event. It calls data loaded. Data loaded goes and sets the train data on this, and then anything that's bound to train data externally, like the Google Map plugin, will just rerun automatically. There's a created function, which is similar to the ready function, and it's just binding the trains to an empty array, which that actually should be train data, in all honesty. And then again, I'm using the finder for this .colon to get Ajax, so I can get at the response, make a copy of it, cram it in train data, and then the method go just tells core Ajax to go make the request. And then you just make it handle as JSON, and then it does the standard xhr.response text and parses it for JSON for you. It's just part of what the core Ajax element does. And then here, this is why I said you could only have one template as a root element, because I'm using a template as a nested one to do a repeat. So for each train in the train data that's coming back, I'm just binding latitude, longitude, title, direction, and icon. And then in the span, I'm doing something similar. So any questions so far about what is going on or happening? Is it all making sense as to how things are being glued together? I'm going to take that as everyone understands. Well, you can't have, so this template tag that's closing down here and is opened way up here, it's just, you can only have one template tag as a direct child of a Polymer element. Inside of that template, you can have as many as you want. Otherwise, it would be confused as to what's going on.
Repeat makes it so you don't have to. Right.
Yeah, this is basically just a for loop, and it just spits out a ton of Google Map marker tags, one for each object in the train data array. The one thing that I should mention out is, if you notice, we put a div around the paper tabs, and then inside of the train route, you can use a content object with a select and say every div that you put inside of the train route should be in this content element, which places it inside of the toolbar. If I wanted to, you could also just put a content tag like underneath, and then if you don't specify a type, then any additional content that gets put in your control will go there. Or you could do a select span or whatever you wanted, or image, and then you could allow people to put in their own content, but you can still style it in the right position inside of your have. So if we came out here, side of this, we just did some span, said hello world, type. If we save this, I don't have the paid for version of that. That's not what I wanted. That's Chrome. Wrong Chrome. Failing all over the place. I think my server still runs. Okay. Let's just refresh this. And then inside of the elements, one, we should see hello world somewhere. Might be being covered up by something. So I have a div and my hello world. Apparently my hello world is there, but it's behind everything. I don't know if that's going to actually make it show up. Nope. The Google Maps thing is just on top of it. Either way, it should say hello world right there, which is underneath the core toolbar. So it's positioned where I would expect it to be. So if you were to make like a contact card, that's how you could lay out like an image and then their name or title and description or anything else, just by allowing them. And you'd generally have to make all of the components, at least in Polymer, and then most of the ones up on Bower have a component page, and they tell you the properties that it has and the events and any methods that are on it. So you could declare how this control should be used. And then if anyone was paying attention, you'd probably see that we're making a lot of requests currently. Because when we bring in all of these elements with those HTML imports, you'll see that it's getting the platform.js, and then it's getting Polymer tabs and train route and core selector, which is used by the core tabs. And then we're getting the paper tabs and the Google Maps and then the core header panel and all these other HTML imports. So it's,
those are all
yeah, all the web components that are being used, and then some of the web components that I use other ones like core selector. It's how the tab control works. It's using core selector underneath the covers. So we can fix this by, if I can bring up my PowerPoint again. We have build support. So they have Vulcanize. So if you install Vulcanize, that will allow you to flatten your HTML imports, and then it can extract or inline JavaScript, and then it can strip whitespace and comments out of your build. So to see how that works, it's really not that difficult. Let's bring up this, my other command prompt. I'm going to go into my public folder since that's where all my files are. So we can see that we have an index.html. So if you vulcanize and just say that you want to vulcanize index.html, I want to put it out as build.html, and we run this, then it will go and build my. So now we have build.html. Since I didn't tell it to strip whitespace or comments, this file is rather large because it's now taken all the web components and flattened them with their JavaScript and everything. But at least we have one file. So now if you come here and then you just do build.html, it all loads. It's all good, and now you'll see we pull just the JavaScript files directly and build.html, we're missing all the individual component calls. Since the Google Maps API makes a ton of calls, there's still quite a few requests because it's just pulling in all the Google Maps static things. But we can flatten those. And if we want to do one step further, there's the actual content script. The content security policy, which if the browser supports it, it doesn't allow you to run inline JavaScript. So you can do that with just the CSP flag. And then what it does is it actually will make your build HTML, and then it rips all those script tags in your element out. So here's all the Polymer calls and everything for all your elements. So now you don't have any nested JavaScript, any script tags in your HTML anymore. It'll actually bring this in, and nothing actually changes because it's actually already updated the build HTML to bring in the JavaScript, the build.js from the HTML file. So if you wanted to automate this process in a build, then you could do that and trim down some of your HTTP requests. And let's go just one step further and tell it to, let's just add the -s and strip out any additional white space. So now you just get a giant single line file, and the build HTML is considerably smaller. It's no longer 4,000 lines, but it is just kind of a block of mess. Yeah, it says it's 3 lines, but it's 3 really, really long lines. Well, the third line is just an empty. So it really just has the doc type and then a single line, but Sublime is wrapping for you. So you can do things like that. So do we have any questions now? So I did this as a way to show you that you could add routes if we ink and paste.
Yeah, so your web component
We're,
can just set whatever routes.
yeah.
Are here.
Yes, so there's actually so if we just do this, there is a bus route too. It actually does exist. And then if we search for this, I don't think it's gonna. Oh, that would do it. Thank you. There we go. Well, I need to make this wider, but either which way, if we hit bus route, since we don't know what these buses are, they're black icons. So here's the bus number to SL Central or to the medical center. Those are just the straight strings that come back. Just like if we went to Redline, you could tell that this, oh, that one is actually an interesting train that doesn't move because it's actually in the Utah Transit Authority's like repair facility. So it's not actually giving us a destination. But this one would tell us that it's going to medical, this one tells us that it's going to Daybreak, and then the corresponding train number that they're referencing them with. But, and basically any route number that UTA supports, you could build this with. I just specifically call it train routes. So that's a way that should this web component not rely on the server component and could hit UTAs directly, this is the only thing that you would actually require to use it. I'm hoping that they add the core's request header for allowing the origin star, like most APIs allow, like Reddit's JSON API. You can hit that directly from the browser, and clearly Google Maps allows you to do that. So that's how you would configure these things and change them without needing to make any changes to the train route HTML web component directly. You could just bind whatever you need and lay them out with the different component tags internally.
Not to interrupt, but if we have a fire drill for the building,
Okay.
just
What's the scale of that?
How well does it scale? Meaning if you had a ton of elements. I haven't obviously load balanced it, or not load balanced, but load tested it. But I can't imagine that it performs any worse than anything else that has a similar amount of HTML.
It's got a lot of janky numbers, so
It's smart, so if you're bringing in the same shadow DOM, Chrome can internally kind of figure that out. And if you have a web component that brings in a certain JS file, it's not going to pull that JS from the server multiple times if it already has it locally and things like that. So there is some slightly smart scaling in there. And if anyone's wondering what self-end is, this is kind of like a line bottom. It's one of the alignment attributes from Polymer.
there's all lines that there is that.
There's what?
All lines that there is on that.
Oh, no, that's one of the things I did. This is why every other third-party app that hits the UTA, you have to choose a specific line. But inside of the server JS, I'm kind of abusing it to where I'm saying get drain data for those 4 lines.
So currently, all the lines go back for the plus
No, it wouldn't. If you really wanted all lines to do that, you could get the static lines file from the UTA and then parse that in here and then literally query for every single line they have. But that seemed a little excessive. But yeah, ideally your web components shouldn't rely on a server component, or if they did, they would be a publicly accessible thing like the Google API. So that's why the Google Maps, there was nothing specific to go in here. I just pointed it at the latitude and longitude of Salt Lake City, set the zoom level to where the slider for zoom should be, and then that's all I needed to do to get the Google Maps loaded in. And then if you just place Google Map markers inside of the Google Map tag, it has a content with a select of a Google Map marker and can figure out where to place all these based on the latitude and longitude properties. And then these titles, if you just click on any one of these trains, there's the title that shows up. And then I'm putting the span inside of the Google Marker tab to do this little tooltip if you just hover instead of click. So that's what this span inside of there is doing for you and what the title tag is doing. And then the train icon, the server is returning the image that I should be displaying.
For the setting for the tooltip, is that just happen in that span, or do you do that span? So if you want
For
to change
the one that I click on, so this one,
yeah, so if you want to
yeah,
change-
that's just the default Google Maps one. If I wanted to change that, I would have to do something else.
you would just add the style to the span.
No, because the span is actually this tooltip, just the hover one. You know how when you click on like the little teardrop shape one, it gives you some additional data? That's what the title, that's where the title is getting put into. So you can put an image tag and other things, and it'll actually go in here. So you can configure how that looks. And it's just weird that, so yeah, normally they look like this and it all fits on one line. That weird drop-down thing is apparently part of the default style.
Can you use this on your phone?
You could if you hosted the server part somewhere that your phone could hit. So if I ran the server somewhere public, and then you could, yeah, if I threw it up on Heroku or something like that, then yes, you could run it from your phone without a problem. It's just straight HTML and JavaScript. There's no Flash or anything to it. for the different browsers on your phone, so it should work without a problem. So other than that, no one has any other questions, then that's, I don't know why that slide replayed, but so there's the link to the Polymer project. There's the Bower.io search if you want to just find other Polymer components, then the Vulcanize repository, and then the sample code that I have is up on my GitHub. So if you wanted to search here, you could just do Polymer, and you could see that clearly here's the Polymer packages that we pulled down. There's voice elements and the Polymer boilerplate. Here's the Google Maps. There's the one I'm actually using. There's a Pokemon one where you can put in a name of a Pokemon. So how these things are usually done is there's a demo, but so let's actually show you what the component page looks like for the Google Map one like I used. It's going to take you to here, but then there's a component page. And then you can see that they've got some example usages. And if we keep scrolling past those, here's all their attributes, which are the properties that you can set or change. Show center markers, map type, version, disable default UI, everything. And then properties, the API key, which I actually went and made an API key and then found out that you didn't even need one. So you can just leave that off. And then there's the event. So that's how I knew that the on-Google Map ready, I could bind to that. And then the only method that it has is clear, just to remove all the markers. And then, again, you can sit here and see. And this one, if you go to the demo, you'll see that they did change it to have a picture, but the overall styling of the outer part is the same. I don't think so. So they had Go Giants, and then inside they have their image source tag. Do I have that backwards? I do have that backwards. The title is apparently that. So yes. That's where their image tag is inside. That's apparently what goes on the clipped balloon bubble. I have it backwards. And then you can make markers draggable or not, if you wanted to move them around for whatever reason. I don't think you can drag those because I think they're not draggable. Oh, wait, there we go.
Yeah, we got all that.
Yeah. Yeah, all their examples, and then you can do directions and other things. So their directions one might be interesting. Yeah, yeah. So there you go. So either one, you can do it by street address or latitude and longitude. I know these go outside of one another. So okay. Either which way, that's how those things normally work. And then there's even like Google, pretty much any of the Google stuff is on here. It's kind of interesting. So there's Google Charts and Drive and YouTube and Calendar and Analytics, Sheets, whatever you wanted to do. I don't know if we have any interest in doing charts, but charts was kind of amusing to look at because it's a pretty decent little library for different charts. And they're not overly difficult to use. And then there's weird things like this. So pretty comprehensive charts, and then if you look at their examples, you really just feed in the data and you're done. They hide all the complex things away from you that you would otherwise need to do, and I know we use charting libraries and other things. Makes it super nice to use, right? Because you saw how easy it was to get this Google Map thing, and I don't know if you've even seen what it would take otherwise to bring this into your page. This is not the easiest of things. So you'll see here's my Google Map markers, and there's a ton of Google Map markers that we have in here. But then if you look at the shadow root for Google Maps, they've got their own Google Maps API, and then there's this div, and that div has a ton of stuff in it, and there's a template which has its own document fragment, and then there's just a lot of weirdness going in on some of these. So I don't know about you, but I really don't want to have to figure all that out just to bring in this. And then I know the Google Maps one, you can also pass in a JavaScript object for any of the features that they didn't make properties for in Polymer. So there's even parts of the API that they didn't expose easily. So some of the more advanced features you can still get using the web component.
Remember that they used to be in the added
Oh, did they? I don't know.
That's it's like 100.
Oh.
So you're saying it's still too low.
Oh, when I was playing with it?
I ate one day.
Oh, that's kind of funny, actually. So, if nobody has any further questions, then that is about it.